Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Tuesday show. So, we are winding down to the last couple of weeks of this Tuesday show. And man, can you guys believe it has already been over 7 months since I started this particular sort of program? Um, yeah, initially, it was just a random day that I posted a particular video. And at the time, I was actually going to put out that particular series, which we now know was the Tuesday show looking at the WWF Hasbros of the 90s. And the original plan was get these episodes out maybe 2, 3 times a week. And it didn't work out that way. Each episode was running, hour 15, hour 30 minutes. And I'm like, no, man, I don't want to do that to my viewers. I don't want to force you guys to watch an hour plus episode, multiple times per week. So I'm like, let's make this special. Let's try a weekly special, a weekly Tuesday show, which just happened to be the day that I posted, said first episode. And for over 7 months, 7.5 months, however long it's been now, this has got to be one of my longest running segments. And it's been an absolute blast making these shows. But as I've said, WWF Hasbros, your WWF LJNs, your AWA Remcos, and today we're moving on to the WCW Galoobs. Now, these Tuesday shows normally entail figures that I have at least the complete collection, or if not 100% complete, better than 95% complete of the line. So that entails carded figures, that entails loose figures, and if there's anything else that line released, wrestling rings, title belts, things of that nature, thumb wrestlers, etc. I wanted to incorporate all of those into my Tuesday shows for that particular line: Hasbro, LJN, Remco, etc. So with WCW Galoobs, they only ran for two series in 1990 and 1991. Now, there was a planned third series originally, and if you actually get on Facebook and look up Kevin Pelkey, he actually sells the Series 3 prototypes that Galoob had originally planned and designed. You might have to get them unpainted, but you could probably get them painted too. I'm pretty sure if you reach out to him, he could paint them up and do an excellent job, and it won't cost you an arm and a leg for them either. Maybe a couple $100 for 7 figures or what have you. Right now, I did get those figures in months and months ago. I sent them out to be painted. I'm still waiting to get that collection back. Hopefully, I am able to have the Series 3 unreleased prototypes back before I get to Series 3. Otherwise, next week will be the end of the Tuesday shows. Now, there were plans about potentially expanding and moving on to the WCW original San Francisco Toymakers afterwards. That's still up in the air. Depending on how my viewers feel, I might continue on the Tuesday shows with that particular line, or this might be it for me. Either way, guys, this is another fun line to collect. And the difference between, let's say, something like LJN or Remco, just like Hasbro, at least I had Galoob figures as a kid. And I've talked about this so often, and my God, it's funny because my entire life I didn't know that these were made by Hasbro. In fact, I didn't know that these were Hasbro's and or calling them Hasbro's, manufactured by Hasbro, etc. until I became an adult collector, right at the tail end of 2021, right? Maybe when I saw the Netflix series, maybe that's when I learned that they were made by Hasbro. So when did that come out? 2019, 2020, something like that. So, but Galoobs, even as kids, we always called them Galoob. So we always knew the name of this toy line, which was so odd. So at some point, we must have looked at this carding and just kept that image in our head. And I wasn't a fan of Galoob when I was young. And my entire life, oddly enough, Galoobs were my number two. This is odd. My number two favorite toy line. But they were my default favorite toy line, right? What did we have as kids? We had Hasbro's. We had Galoob. Going back to my collection later on in life, when I started collecting, I'm like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 10, 15, etc. I was able to count out the numbers and be like, hey, okay, we had 17 Hasbro's when we were young. We had 7 Galoob figures when we were young. So that kind of gives you an idea of the amount of figures that we had when we were kids. My brothers and I. So the first figure we're looking at, Ric Flair. I'm positive pretty much any child out there who ever had a Galoob figure had a Ric Flair. I mean, Ric Flair was absolutely everywhere. And when we look at these figures, we are going to look at them in order as they are displayed on the back of the card. That's how I display them, as they dangle from my little ledge. So, carding is relatively simple, but you know what? It's one of those things that just jump out at you. You know immediately what that carding is before even seeing the figures, right? So it's I'm gonna steal this line from Jason Up because he says it often enough, and it's kind of embedded in my brain. As he likes to say, it is visually iconic. It is. For a simple white card backing, it is. It's a very iconic look. Very simple. Ric Flair, like I said, we're talking about an absolute legend in wrestling history. Someone that pretty much we all grew up watching. And it doesn't matter if you were born in the 60s, 70s, or if you were born in 2000, 2010. You've probably seen Ric Flair wrestle at some point. This man had a match at like age 70 and was still wrestle, okay? So that just shows his longevity. But in the late 70s, 80s, AWA champion, NWA champion, WCW, I think it was probably WCCW, etc. I mean, just man was everywhere. Japan, right? I don't really have to go into great detail about Ric Flair because we all have history with the Nature Boy. And for a lot of people, this is one of those figures that might be one of their favorites ever. I loved this figure when I was a kid. Among the Galoobs, this was one of the most playable figures. Today, I look at it, I'm like, okay, it's about a 4.5, 5 out of 10 figure. It's an average piece. I mean, it's not something super flashy. Why would I love it as a kid, but not so much as an adult? I don't hate it. Don't get me wrong. There's no shade towards this figure whatsoever. But when you look at figures like even Rick Steiner, which I think is a little bit better than Ric Flair, when you look at like Jimmy Garvin, which is a fantastic figure, I like that one. I enjoy that one a lot. Even Dustin Rhodes, which is probably one of the top 3, top 5 best Galoob figures. What do you find about those particular pieces? Legs spread apart, crouched down, arms spread apart, and they're down low, right? If the arms were raised a little bit higher, this would have been a much more playable and enjoyable figure. So, but head sculpt, absolutely incredible. Another thing that if I were born, I would say a few years earlier, figures like this probably would have spoken to me a whole lot more. Because let's say I was born 3 years earlier. I was born, let's say, 82, for example. That means I could have potentially grown up playing with LJNs, or at least had, a select few LJNs in my life. And if I were born between 79 and 82, and I had LJNs as a kid and I was playing with those, And then later on, 1990 rolls around and WCW gets their own action figure line. Okay, you got, yes, they're smaller pieces, but just like LJN, they're basically the same exact thing, right? Immovable figures with a specific pose for each character. It makes sense. When you look at WCW Galoob, when you look at WCW Original San Francisco Toymakers, what are they? In essence, they are basically copycats of LJN, right? A lot of the figures have very similar poses. Big John Studd has a very similar pose to that of Sid Vicious. Uh, Tom Zank, for example. So how about this? Greg Valentine and Barry Windham. Perfect example, perfect replica, basically. Tom Zank, I think I mentioned. Who has the Tom Zank pose? I'm looking at that. I'm trying to think. You could technically say Bob Orton would be a good example, but Bob Orton's like so, right? Instead of hands up like so. But I mean, when you look at the different figures, uh, even like Terry Funk with the branding iron in his hand, that could be a very comparable figure. So that has some pieces that's comparable, but that's basically what these are. They're just miniaturized LJNs. And LJN, Remco, Hasbro, Galoob is no different than any other toy line. Yes, they have their variants. This one is a Arn Anderson with bald spot on the top of his head. The enforcer, as they call him. Right. All right. That is my only Arn Anderson. And like I said, that was the Arn Anderson with bald spot. But Arn Anderson did also come with a non bald spot. So if you do find one with bald spot, it's a little bit more rare, a little bit more pricey. So in the first couple of series, when I talked about Hasbro's, when I talked about LJNs, whether we were doing carding or we were talking about loose figures, I always gave, prices or basic value, for new collectors so they can have a general idea of what to spend, what not to spend on particular figures. And I basically moved away from that during Remco. There were a few figures here and there that I probably gave a general idea of what the value were for those particular pieces. So with Galoob, I'm going to try and kind of do the same thing. Go back to what I did the first couple series with Hasbro and with LGN and give you pricing. So pretty much any of the LGN or the Galoobs, let's give a basic $10 price tag on any Galoob figure. Yes, you are going to have those that are more valuable. Arn Anderson bald spot, this could be a $25 figure to the right collector, from the right seller, etc. Look at Arn Anderson, Ted Arcidi, Bam Bam Bigelow. So Galoob, they do mimic a lot of your LJN figures. So any LJN collector, they're probably going to be absolutely in love with these because they're basically reincarnations of what they already had when they were with their previous line. And Galoob came out in 1990. The same thing as your Hasbro's came out in 1990 with the first series release. So you're basically jumping from your 89 LJNs to your 1990 Galoobs. So even though they weren't WWF, they were still giving you that whole WWF LJN feel. With carding on these figures, now the value has dropped on a lot of these pieces. So since the value has dropped, a lot of these figures that might have gone for $150, $200, once upon a time, like that Ric Flair, that could have been a $200 MOC at one point. Today, you might be able to win a Ric Flair Galoob mint on card, where the card is in excellent condition, great bubble, just perfect carding, and you might get it for around $50. Basically, over the last couple of years, I've been noticing LJN, Galoob, Hasbro, etc. The prices, the market has really dropped significantly. So things that you were paying hundreds of dollars for, as early as 2021, 2022, or as late as 21, 22, you're not paying those same prices anymore. So just imagine if a lot of us waited, 6 months later, 12, 18 months later, we could have had a whole lot more to our collections than what we have, because that money that we spent additionally, we could have used it towards other things, right? But Arn Anderson, I feel like the same way. Once upon a time, these figures were all $150, $200, $250 even. Crazy, right? Essentially, they're $40 figures, $50 figures, maybe 75, and that's on high end. So MOC Galoobs do not go for a hefty price anymore. And if you are an MOC collector, or if you're getting into the line, or if you have all of the loose figures now you're thinking about getting carded, Galoob is not too bad. It's not until you really get into Series 2 when you really got to start, forking out some change for some carded figures. Next one we got is Barry Windham. Now, Barry Windham, to me, I've always said, in all honesty, the 31 or so figures that Galoob has released in the first two series, there are only two series, you can keep the other 29 or so figures. Give me Sid Vicious and Barry Windham. If I'm locked up in a jail cell or in prison somewhere, and those are the only two wrestling figures I have to keep me occupied, to to pass the time, I could have more enjoyment with those two figures together than probably the rest of the figures all combined. Perfect play poses between those figures, right? Barry Windham is an absolute beast of a figure. Um, I love the color schemes of characters of like Dustin Rhodes. Like his play pose and all that. So it's hard to keep Dustin Rhodes out of the top two, top three. But I would probably say that Barry Windham is probably the number two best Galoob figure. Your preference? Do you like black shorts? Do you like blue shorts? But other than that, Barry Windham Galoob, second best figure that they made, in my opinion. And as I said, he's just a Greg Valentine LJN figure, right? Now, when you also look at these, now, just to backtrack a little bit, I was a Hasbro guy. Most of our collections were Hasbro figures, and the most play that we had were with the Hasbros. And when you're enjoying, moving arms up and down, and that's why I hate today's, Mattel, Jack Pacific, all that stuff with movable hands and, basically all this extra articulation. No. Legs can be stationary, waist can be stationary, arms. To me, that is literally all the figure needs to do, because you could throw your punch, your clothesline, you could get in position to a perfect body slam. That's why I love those figures. But if you get a Galoob figure that looks like this, you've already got that perfect setup for a beautiful body slam. That's why I figure like characters like Sid Vicious and Barry Windham, their pieces work beautifully in tandem together. So as playable figures, amazing. Unfortunately, I did not have this figure as a kid. Um, so far, Ric Flair is the only one that we've looked at that I've had. So no Arn Anderson, no Barry Windham as a kid. I would still argue that Barry Windham, even a loose piece, is one of the more pricier figures, but we're not talking $30, $40 for this. Even if it's a mint figure with belt, even if the belt is mint, you might find it on somebody's auction. It might go for $20 plus, $30 plus. It's possible, but you can normally find bundles five figures in a bundle, 7, 9, 12, whatever. And you can probably get them for anywhere between 50 to $100. If the condition is mint, maybe they'll go up to 125 because of the quantity of figures in that bundle, right? But that's why I kind of give like a bare minimum on average of about $10 for your basic Galoob figures. Again, Series 2, that price skyrockets, but any of your Series 1, that's a good starting point. And a lot of time on auction, you might get them for around $3 to $6, so it's possible. But for any collector, I think Barry Windham is one of those figures that you have to have as part of your collection. Absolutely amazing. Now, the guy that I consider to be my George Washington of action figures, which is Sid Vicious. Now, for anyone who's tuning into my channel for the first time, any of my guys who've been watching for long periods of time, they know what the whole George Washington thing's about. But if you are new to the channel and you're kind of confused, like what the heck's this guy talking about? Uh, General breakdown, and I never remember the second guy's name. I never look it up, so that's my fault. But in essence, think about it this way: George Washington was a four-star general in the 1900s. The U.S. had two five-star generals, two five-star generals of the Army. General Pershing was one, and I think in the 40s there was another one. I can't remember who that was. Like I said, I never look it up, and it drives me nuts because I always forget the name. But at that time, those two five-star generals outranked George Washington and every other soldier, past and present, right? So in 1976, during America's bicentennial, Congress posthumously promoted George Washington to five-star general, and they notated that he would outrank every soldier, past or present. Every American soldier, past or present. Let me put it that way. So he's basically your number zero soldier. No other soldier, even if it's like the most decorated soldier, it could be your Audie Murphy, okay? It could be the most decorated soldier in U.S. history. Uh, George Washington will still basically be your best soldier, for lack of a better explanation. Sid Vicious, Galoob, I kind of put in that same boat. My entire life, Sid Vicious Galoob was my favorite action figure. Favorite wrestling figure? Absolutely. Was there any other toy that I had as a kid that I loved more? I don't think so. I mean, not really. I mean, this was a very playable, a very utilized action figure. And the only thing I could ever think about that I ever used more than Sid Vicious Galoob, and I don't think that was even possible, was probably your Series 4 Bret Hart and Undertaker. Maybe the Series 4 British Bulldog, but 1990, right? Those came out in 92. So I had more time to play with a figure like this. And Sid Vicious, Royal Rumbles, one-on-one matchups, type, whatever. Sid Vicious was all over the place. I use this figure like crazy. And today, I'd probably argue that your Series 8 Yokozuna Hasbro is probably the greatest wrestling figure ever made, right? So, by classifying Sid Vicious as my George Washington, I'm basically saying he's my number zero. It doesn't matter how much I love another figure, even if I love that figure more than this one, I'm basically still putting this on the highest pedestal regardless. So hopefully that explanation kind of made sense. Now, don't get me wrong. Hasbro released their Sid Justice in 1993 for Series 5. Open hand, arm popping. It's a fine figure. Don't get me wrong. But perfect look, perfect play pose. I mean, like I said, just like Big John Studd, you got the arms, spread way out. You got the legs separated really nice, so you got that beautiful to be body slam pose. The way that his arms are out, you had that beautiful body slam himself, right? To body slam someone else, and even he's got a slight crouch in the legs, knees a little bit bent, not bent all the way, not like your Kamala, Hogan, Big John Studd, Andre the Giant, etc. But there's enough of a bend there to make it very comparable to those type of figures. And like I said, leg separation. So you've got that beautiful to be body slam pose. So Sid Vicious, your number one best Galoob figure. Someone can argue that, you know, figure B, figure C, figure D is better. I would call them insane. No, Sid Vicious, this is it. This is literally right there among the greatest action figures ever made. So for a toy line that I didn't even covet as a kid, yet they produced, in my opinion, the greatest figure. So go figure. And additionally, what I cut coming up next. And when you look at these figures, they're like little small statues, right? So it's like, why would you not enjoy them? Because they're not just, these cartoony, articulated figures. They're literally like a screenshot in time, essentially. Even the LJNs, they were kind of cartoony ish, with the 1980s technology and whatnot. And even though these were only made 5 years later, they still look as realistic as possible. So, we a lot of people out there, we kind of refer to them as small statues, and it makes sense. Sting, this was a figure I did not have as a kid. So, first time I ever laid eyes on Sting, adult collector. And, he is this mega superstar. I'm just kind of noticing his black pants up here. It kind of looks like Jimmy Garvin's pants. Now he does come out with the black pants in series two, but that's pretty cool. I noticed that it kind of looked like Jimmy Garvin for a second. The pants, not the character. But same thing. Macho Man, LJN, Sting, Galoob. So I don't like figures that are like this, but I love the Brian Pillman figure, and he's just like so. I mean, I'll get to Brian Pillman shortly, but it kind of gives you an idea of where I'm at with these type of pieces. I mean, it's a fine figure. It's small. It's thin. Is it the most playable figure? I mean, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed this as a kid. Not really. But I mean, it's not a bad piece by any stretch of the imagination. And of course, it stings. So you are going to get multiple releases of your mega superstar because Sting is to WCW what Hulk Hogan is to WWF. Anytime I turned on wrestling, anytime I turned on TNT and WCW was on, flipping through the channels, who's wrestling? Steiner's against Nasty Boys. Legion of Doom versus Nasty Boys. Uh, Sting versus Vader. Sting versus Ric Flair. Those were always staples. That was so consistent. I mean, you get the best of Hulkamania, you get the best of Sting. And his theme song was incredible. Does it rival that of Hulk Hogan? Not quite, but I mean, it's definitely among one of the best wrestling theme songs ever. And one of the most musically endearing songs. And it just meant a mega superstar, right? So back in Texas, he was obviously tag team partners with Dingo Warrior, Ultimate Warrior, and guys like Warrior and Sting, they weren't even considered to be like the best wrestlers. You know, they were like these gym rats, these big, strong, buff guys, but they were also someone that had the right physique to be professional wrestlers. So they were brought into, their respective organizations, and over time they graduated to bigger promotions such as WWF, WCW, etc. And Sting, he was one of those guys who always bragged, not bragged, but one of the things I respected the hell about him was that he wasn't going to go to New York. He wasn't going to abandon WCW where basically he made his mark, right? And made a name for himself just to get increase in pay from WWF. All of his friends, all of his colleagues were jumping ship from WCW, going to WWF for the big payday. He said he wasn't ever going to do that. And, he stayed true to his word. Obviously, at the end of the 90s, when Vince McMahon purchased WCW and the two companies merged, at that point, he really didn't have a choice in the matter, right? Either you kind of join this company or you're out of work. Yeah, he could have gone to like Japan and etc. But I don't know if he, to my knowledge, I don't think he actually wrestled in WWE directly. I think he was a TNA wrestler. So again, I'm not familiar with that because I wasn't following his career, following wrestling during those stages. So, but he gets a bunch of figures. Two in Series 1, two more in Series 2. All right. After Sting. All right. What can I say? I mean, what more can any of us say about Lex Luger? The total package. Yeah. This is so basically any of these MOCs. I would probably give you an estimate of about $50 for most of these. Sting, I would probably say would probably be a little bit higher. Maybe you could look out for $50, but you might go up to 75, 100, even 125 to 150. It's possible. The salmon pants, aka pink pants, Sting might go for a will go for a much heftier price because it's a more rare variant. Blue pants Sting is much more common. But so you're looking at, let's say, $50 for a blue pants. Let's say 150 for the salmon pants. Again, if you could get less than that, all the power to you. But let's just give you a higher price and hope for the best, hope for a better price, right? Because last thing I want to do is say, oh yeah, you could get salmon pants for $60. Get on eBay, Mercari, and be like, everyone's selling it for $300. Be like, dude, you're way off. At that point, no, don't ever buy any Series One Galoob for $200+ nowadays. Value isn't there. If you want it for your personal collection, if the card is absolute perfect mint, if it's something that you want for grading purposes for your personal collection and you don't care about paying the extra money, that's a different story. But like me, this stuff isn't being sold, right? My personal collection is going to stay with me for life. But what if I have to sell it off one day? I want to make sure that the value is still there. And a lot of these prices, they're dropping significantly. Lex Luger, this isn't even a $50 figure. You could probably get a decent carded Lex Luger Series 1 for around $30 MOC. So that just shows you how poor this particular figure is. Now, yes, we did have Lex Luger when we were young. So Ric Flair, Sid Vicious, and Lex Luger so far are figures that we had from childhood. You know what? You bring Lex Luger in, and you get your opponents in a double DDT, and that works. This particular pose works beautiful for the DDT, but what if you want to body slam someone? You got to pretend to do a stupid body slam, right? Same way when you're working with your LJN King Kong Bundy. Here's the thing: I absolutely despise the Galoob Lex Luger figure, but I absolutely love the King Kong Bundy LJN. Part of it is size, of course. You got this 8-inch figure compared to a 4-inch. Got it. That helps. Rubber compared to hard rubber, hard plastic. I still don't know what the hell these things are made out of. I'm assuming it's like a hardened rubber, but I mean it could be made out of like plastic, but I mean they can move, right? A little bit if you push on them, right? So I'm thinking of hardened rubber. So technically, yeah, they're both rubber figures because these actually feel more like your big rubber guys from Major Bendy's. So they might use the same material. So I had Lex Luger, despised using him, but you have a select amount of wrestling figures, so you basically made do with what you had available. And yeah, I got use out of it. So for that purpose, that was fine. I mean, it's a good looking figure. If you're just looking at these as small statues, something that you're selling to adults back in 1990 for display, this is beautiful. This is a beautiful figure. This is a good looking figure. Excellent look. Uh, he's got the muscles and everything, ripped abs. I mean, this is a fine piece. But remember, action figures are not designed for adults to collect. This is just a fun hobby for a lot of us. You got to think that toys are made for kids for play, right? So you got to think about play pose and the enjoyment that kids are going to have from playing with those. Whether you're 5 years old or if you're 50 years old, hey, play is play, okay? So you want to have fun and sit down and have yourself a wrestling match. You think your opinion at 5 years old is gonna change if you sit down and have a wrestling match with this guy compared to when you're 30, 40, 50 years old and trying to sit down and have a wrestling match with this, right? So you gotta look at it like that. Me, a lot of my opinions from childhood basically still resonate to this day. For a display, for a statue esque piece, it's perfect. But for a playable action figure, that it's not. Lex Luger, even loose, minty. It's mint with original championship, maybe $15-$20 if you're lucky. But this is, I mean, this is generally a $1 figure on auction. If it's got good color, maybe it goes up to like $3, $5, $7. But Lex Luger's not an expensive piece. That's what again. I kind of stick with the $10 price tag for pretty much any loose Galoob. So if you kind of keep that in mind, you should be okay as a collector and as a buyer. So following up Lex Luger, we've got Ron Simmons. Now, because of the way that he is situated on the card, I cannot put him in one of these little retro protective cases, which sucks because I have OCD and that drives me nuts having them all not packaged the same way. I used to think that this was probably going to, throughout my entire life, that this was going to go down as the worst action figure ever created. It is still a horrendous piece. Ron Simmons Galoob is not ideal for anybody. If you are looking at it as a display piece and nothing more, It looks fantastic. Think about with any of these figures that they look fantastic. Go back to the whole idea of play and the use for kids and enjoyment, right? You know how annoying it was to kind of get someone like this to kind of like pretend to kind of like do like these small punches to the face, but that's basically what you were doing. You were like kind of like treating it like you were punching them in the face, like that's, or they would be on the ground and kind of like drop a punch to the face or something. Uh, Maybe roll them over or trying to hook the leg for a pin or something. This was an elbow drop only figure, really. That's really all you could do with Ron Simmons. Yes, I got a lot of play with Ron Simmons when I was a kid. Did I enjoy any of it? Absolutely not. You think I had one-on-one matches with Ron Simmons, tag team matches with Ron Simmons? God no. The only time Ron Simmons would ever be utilized is if I had a Royal Rumble match, which was pretty much all the time because I never enjoyed one-on-one tag teams. I always enjoyed Rumbles because I always liked mixing in all of the figures or as many characters as possible. So, and today I still feel the same way, right? Looks great for a statue, terrible for a children's toy. Now, Random Treasures, when they made their custom Galoob 2 up and they put him in rubber form, oddly enough, I do like the rubber form of this piece. Whole arm fused to the chest. That's annoying. But then I gotta look back and I gotta think about, okay, what about Vince McMahon? His hand is fused to the chest. He's got the little microphone and he's kind of talking in, right? And he's got the little hand up, pointer finger up. So he's got the pointer finger, which I hate, and he's got the hand fused to the chest. But I really love the LJN Vince McMahon. I think it's a fantastic piece. So what's the difference between that fused hand to the chest and this one? At least I have nostalgia for this one, which I actually had as a kid, right? Now, Vince McMahon, I never had LJNs as a kid. I didn't know about LJN until 2020 ish. So I don't know if I would put Ron Simmons down as the worst action figure ever made anymore. I think original San Francisco Toymakers with their Macho Man might be worse because he's just a tall, lanky stand-up guy with kind of like his hands on his waist, and that's kind of like what it is. So you think LJN Rick Rude? That's basically Macho Man in hardened rubber, 6, 7 inch format. So at least with the LJN Rick Rude, he had beautiful color scheme to the pants, right? So that was something. With the Macho Man, you had mixed colors, you had black and white variants, so there were options. But I actually think I see Ron Simmons on eBay, not recently, but I've in the past I've seen Ron Simmons, not even a series 2, but a series 1, go for some good prices. Like I've seen them go on auction for $30 plus. I'm like, wait a minute, it's freaking Ron Simmons. Why is anybody paying more than $5 for this figure? So yeah, not a valuable piece to me, but if you do get him like so, where he's a pretty minty piece, you might have to pay up for Ron Simmons because majority of the Ron Simmons, he is going to have some kind of paint loss, usually around the butt area or whatnot, but or some paint loss in the shoes or something. But like I said, he could be around a $5 to $10 figure. It's not a crazy expensive piece. Next one up is Butch Reed, and they just simply put Doom on here. And yep, they also put Doom for Ron Simmons. Now, I never had Butch Reed as a kid. Now, could you imagine how much enjoyment, how much more play and pleasure we would have gotten from Galoob figures if we didn't have Ron Simmons, but if we had Butch Reed instead? They're basically the same figure, same color scheme and everything. Blue pants, white gym shoes. But You also give him one of the best play poses of any action figure ever made. So when I look at my favorite Galoob figures, Sid Vicious is an obvious number one. Barry Windham, an obvious number two. I rate Butch Reed as the third best Galoob figure. Maybe I follow up with like Dustin Rhodes at number four. Number five, I think number five would be the Series 2 robed Lex Luger. So I think that would be an easy top five selection. But oh yeah, Series 2, they re-released that the crappy one, but they also gave you a beautiful robe version that makes up for both of that crap. And next week when we review Series 2, I mean that's gonna be pretty exciting. But Butch Reed, absolutely incredible piece. Really nice about Butch Reed. And you got to be very meticulous when you look at these figures, or if you're looking on auction or something, looking on eBay. What kind of Butch Reed are you getting? Because this does have quite a number of variants. So let's look at the first comparison. You look at option one with like very bright blue pants, blue jeans, right? And option two, he's still wearing blue jeans, but they're like a dark blue or sort of purple pants. So we'll call it blue pants versus purple pants. But this right here, this is the most common Butch Reed that you are going to find. The Butch Reed with blue. And if he is in excellent condition, little or no paint loss, I wouldn't I would recommend, well, I wouldn't recommend ever paying up, but if you are going to pay up for an action figure, Sid Vicious, Barry Windham, Butch Reed from Series 1, those are the pieces I'd go for because look at them. They're all fantastic. Again, I go back to Ram Treasures because she made a Barbarian. She also, Net also made a Mr. T LJN utilizing this play pose, and it's incredible. All right, so this is such a fun and usable play pose, but he's also basically a Series 3 LJN SD Jones to an extent. Now SD Jones has the arm out with the choke slam, right? So how does he have his hand? His hand's like so. Left hand choke slam with the right hand punch. And SD Jones is, if not the greatest LJN, he's about a top five best LJN. Anyone that goes back and watches like the 30th episode I made and says, dude, you put him at like number 10 before. That was yeah, that was over 3 years ago. Today, there's no reason to keep SD Jones out of top five, but that's basically what Butch Reed is. He's an SD Jones. So look at this, uh, SD Jones, Butch Reed. So, in fact, when I start my Maniac Riot Wrestling line, if it ever gets off the ground rolling, right, one of my figures is gonna look just like this with that play pose because that's incredible. It's one of my favorites. Now that's variant number one. Now variants two and three are basically identical figures. So you really have to pay close attention what you have on hand because you might look at a figure and be like, oh man, I already have that one. I could sell the duplicate. A lot of people aren't going to be aware of the variation between the figures. So, and I think even I was the same way. I didn't realize I had a variant. And I kind of looked at the figure and I matched them up with what I had in hand. I'm like, oh crap, I got to pull that from one of my listings and update that listing to say, hey, this figure is no longer available as part of that bundle. Why? Because I don't know which one I had originally. I think maybe this was the one I had originally, and I think this one I just added. So this one, you look at his shoes, he's got the little red Nike swoosh, right? On variant 2, or third variant, whatever you want to say, no red Nike swoosh. But when you actually look at the figure, it does still have the little swoosh in there, right? It's just there's no red, there's no filling. Now, someone can argue, well, that's just paint loss. No. You can look at it and you could tell that it's never been painted, because how do you have, beautiful fill-ins on the inside of the shoes and just, I mean, how does the paint fall off so completely? And on all four sides, right? After all these years, other figures still have all of theirs shown. And it's not just my feet. If you actually look it up, there are legitimate variants with the swoosh, no swoosh. So the Butch Reed variant, one of the key pieces, I think it's the no swoosh that's the most rare. And that sucker, if you're a variant collector, that it by itself could probably fetch you a pretty penny. How much? $30? 60? I mean, we're not talking hundreds of dollars, but we're talking a lot of money for, a Series 1 loose figure. So, all right, after Butch Reed, we've got Rick Steiner. Now, I did have Rick Steiner. Well, I did have both Steiner brothers as a kid, and they were some of the most enjoyable pieces. So, yes, uh, I would say that yes, yes, Sid Vicious was my most played with Galoob. I would say Ric Flair might be the second most played with, but at that time, I would probably have said that maybe Rick Steiner was essentially my second favorite piece, possibly third behind Pillman. I don't know. But Ric Flair and Rick Steiner are basically the same figure for the most part. Just like I explained earlier with Jimmy Garvin and Dustin Rhodes, etc. You got a number of these figures throughout Series 1 and Series 2 that have that same slouch down, hands apart, hands down low, crouched fighting pose. And this is just another one. This one has a sort of, it looks like it's sort of yellowing. So I could see a figure like this going on auction today for around and selling for like $30. Between 30 and 50, maybe $60 on a high end. There's no reason anyone should pay up for an MOC Rick Steiner anymore. And like I said, it's, you know, basically identical pieces, right? So because Rick Steiner was the good guy, I probably got more play or more enjoyment out of Rick Steiner. I probably used Rick Flair more, but I enjoyed Rick Steiner more. And where Ric Flair has two open hands, if I'm not mistaken. Nope, he does have the closed fist. Yeah, so they both have the closed right hand and the open left hand. So I think Rick Steiner might have his legs spread apart a little bit further than Ric Flair, but that's like the only like major significant change as far as the actual body positioning. And of course, when you pick up the figure, you got to make sure that the tattoos are intact and what have you. I mean, this figure I could have updated, but I'm not really worried about that. It's a Series 1. And I'm using it for like videos like this, and that's about it. But the Steiners, you need to have Steiners, both Steiners for your collection. Rick Steiner is a worthwhile action figure. Scott Steiner, however, here's the funny thing about Scott Steiner. Oh man. As a kid, I loved the Scott Steiner Galoob figure. Loved it. Played with it like crazy. I'm like, you could do so much with this action figure as an adult. We got the Mr. Perfect Random Treasures custom figure, which was basically a Scott Steiner Galoob 2 up, essentially. Right. And I looked at that pose and I'm like, it's a fine figure, but I can't stand the pose. But I'm like, wait a minute. That's a that's a Galoob Scott Steiner right there. At the time, let's say back in the day when I was doing like my top countdown of Ram treasures, like at one point I was at like 17 figures. Maybe a few months that I came out when there was 21. A few months after that when they were up to like 30 figures, I did a countdown. 30 to number one, etc. I haven't done a countdown since, but they're up to about what 70, 80 figures now. But if I do another countdown like that, it would take me several videos. Let's say 30 minutes of video. That would probably take me about 4 or 5 videos to get through, at least. I look at this figure nowadays, and I'm like, it is a subpar figure. Is it the worst action figure? No. Is it a serviceable piece that you can make use out of? Absolutely. I mean, there are plenty of comparable LJNs. Think about Corporal Kirchner or even someone like Adrian Adonis. They've got the arms out and down. Hillbilly Jim, for example, they got their arms down. Hillbilly Jim actually, this might actually be a very solid comparison because Hillbilly Jim is like, I think Hillbilly Jim's more like this, and that's just basically what he is. Hillbilly Jim left arm up, Scott Steiner right arm up, but we could call this a Hillbilly Jim LJN ish. And I love the Hillbilly Jim LJN. I mean, it took me a long time to really appreciate that figure. Before I was like, yeah, it's just part of the collection. It's not a bad piece, but I mean, it's not anything that like, I'm not over the moon crazy about. And then over the last year and a half or so, I'm like, forget that. Hillbilly Jim is one of the best LJNs, period. Is it a top 20? I would like it to be, but probably not. Top 30? Yeah, I could say Hillbilly Jim's a top 30. Easy enough. I mean, it's a fine piece, but you used to do like these one arm toss overs and whatnot. You got the DDT, and you drop an elbow, and you kind of look at it. He does have like an adequate body slam, right? One arm body slam, or you run and do a power slam. So as a kid, yes, I looked at this figure, and it got a lot of play. Not only was I a huge fan of the Steiners, not only was I a huge fan of Scott Steiner, but to me, that this figure was a playable, serviceable figure that I really enjoyed. But I look at it as an adult and I'm like, I'm not as crazy about it anymore. Do I like the series 2 with the pink and blue more? Probably because it's a different color scheme. I'd say yes. But is it a bad piece? Not at all. It's just not one I covet as much in adulthood as I once did, when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, right? So Scott Steiner, this one is, relatively minty. I mean, his shoelaces are popping like crazy. He's got a nice shine to it, beautiful shine. This is one of the most perfect Steiners I've ever seen. So, this is awesome for the collection. All right, next on up is, nope, not that one. Still going off of the back, the way that they're showing on the back of the card. Brian Pillman, Flying Brian. All right, so yes, we did have Brian Pillman when we were young. And even though he's basically another Sting of sorts, Sting is like so, Brian Pillman's like that. I didn't have Sting as a kid. Would I have liked it? Because he was Sting, absolutely. But like as an adult looking at it, I'm like, it's not anything that's like I'm crazy about. But Brian Pillman, even to this day, even with open hands, even with the hands up, I still love this figure. And yes, best believe when we were young, this figure got played like crazy. And because we only had 7 Galoobs, and Ron Simmons really wasn't the most playable figure in the world, maybe he, like I said, he was only used in Royal Rumbles, and most of the time, very rarely was he actually picked up and utilized. So he could have been in the match 5 minutes. He could have been in that match an hour. It doesn't matter. He was off in the corner being untouched, basically. But Sid Vicious was being utilized like crazy. The Steiners being utilized on a significant basis. Uh, Brian Pillman was being utilized on a significant basis. Ric Flair was being utilized like crazy. And Lex Luger, he's another one from Series 1 that right there alongside Braun Simmons, where we're like, he's there. We'll make use of him because we have him, but not anything that gets you excited about, right? Because it wasn't really a playable figure. Brian Pillman, even the hands up, open, it's still a very enjoyable piece. So I love obviously he's a former football player. So, adding the Cincinnati Bengals color scheme to the trunks, I mean, that's pretty awesome, right? And of course, later on, he was part of the Hollywood Blondes with Steve Austin, and he'd be part of like the Hart faction with Jim Neidhart, Brett, and Owen, and I think British Bulldog was in there, and there was that one scene. Trying to think if I was still watching. I know about the scene. I think when it comes to Brian Pillman and Steve Austin, I think every fan knows what scene I'm talking about. I'm trying to think if I was still watching wrestling. I don't remember what year that was. I want to say 96. 96 or 97, but I feel like that's wrong. Because I think I was still watching wrestling at that time. Brian, what was it? No, Steve Austin. Steve Austin kicked down the door to Brian Pillman's house, and he had a gun in his hand. Gun goes off, and that's like the end of the episode. I think it was like Raw or something. And who knows if you can even find that on public TV anymore. Maybe somebody had it taped on VHS back in the day or something, and maybe they could upload it to like YouTube or something. But all these channels like Netflix or Peacock, whatever, I mean, I doubt they would ever air something like that, especially with all the sensitivity in the world. No, they would get canceled immediately if something like that aired, and it's a shame because something like that I think would be important. I mean, nobody obviously died; it was part of the act, but yeah, Brian Pillman, he died, and not too long after, and that was sad because I didn't know of Brian Pillman in WCW, especially during this era, because I didn't watch WCW like that, right? But I always knew the name Brian Pillman, and this is what I talk about sometimes. Like, when was it? I was doing a review recently. Maybe it was a magazine review. Maybe it was this past Sunday when I did my magazine review. I mentioned something like maybe I wasn't a fan of Jimmy Snuka when I was young because I didn't like his action figures. Well, because I had the Hasbro Jimmy Snuka, and yes, it got a lot of use, but because the whole fingers, you know, so it was just stupid, right? But no, I think I was a fan of Jimmy Snuka when I was super young, early '90s or whatnot. So was his action figure really in that much of a hindrance to where I wasn't a fan because of that? It's possible. I was a huge fan of Brian Pillman, not because I saw him on TV, knew about him wrestling or anything like that. I loved the man and was a huge fan of Brian Pillman because I loved his action figure. So yeah, I think it's very easy to say that you could be a fan of someone, whether or not it's based on the toy that you grew up playing with. So, being 5 years old when these came out, did we actually get them when we were five? Did we get them a year later, 2 years later? I don't know. Just because they came out in 1990, we could have gotten them in 91, early 92. But I would say, late 90s, early 91 would be a realistic time frame. Same thing with Hasbro's. Depending on when Hasbro's came out, what month in 1990, doesn't mean we got them out the same time. It could have been mid year, late year. It could have been early the next year for Series 1. It's that when we got them. So, all right. This last figure we're looking at, and this is not a character or not a figure I had as a kid. So, first time I ever knew about this one, again, first time when I became an adult collector. All right. As they call him, Z Man, Tom Zank, Pan Am. So, was it, no, it was, yeah, it was Rick Martel. Him and Rick Martel in WWF, and then he kind of jumped ship, and they ended up putting Martel with Tito Santana for Strike Force. I mean, they had some success, some success. I mean, they were all like champions and probably one of like the top tag teams of the '80s, but they had a little bit of success. Oh man, but Tom Zank, I don't have any knowledge of the wrestler. Not a whole lot. I mean, obviously, ever since I got into collecting, I've gone back, I've watched things about so many different characters. I've learned so much about different characters, you know, to expand my knowledge and history, right? But he wasn't someone that I grew up watching. So I didn't have his figure, so I didn't have that nostalgia or that connection to this piece. So when I look at something like this, I look at like that, Jimmy Snuka and Iron Sheik, you know, hand super close to the head type pose. Basically he's a Series 1 LJN Roddy Piper. That's basically what he is. He's a Roddy Piper figure with the hand up like so. I think Roddy Piper has the same distance. Now I think Roddy Piper might be a little bit lower, but about the same, or maybe Piper's a little bit lower, but either way, fighting pose wise, you look at this Galoob line and pretty much any of their action figures, you can compare them to any of the LGNs. Is that an issue? No. I mean, there are only so many poses in the world that you can create, right? When they get to WCW Original San Francisco a few years later, same thing. Now, obviously, for those that don't know, in the 80s, as a matter of fact, David Galoob and his family were actually in line to acquire the rights to license the WWF action figures. Remco was in line, Galoob was in line, LJN was in line. I think there might have been a couple other smaller companies, if I'm not mistaken, but those were basically three of the large ones because those were, at least LJN was a well known uh, video game and toy company. Remco was already a huge company, but they were known as sort of like their own bootleg company because they kind of ripped off larger companies like like Star Trek, or Star Wars, and He-Man and things like that, right? So I think that's what kind of hurt Remco as well. But I just think LJN just came in under the table with the best offer, and I don't think any fan is disappointed in how that line turned out. But Galoob, they were in line to win a contract for the 1984. I guess we could call it Wrestling Superstars for the sake of this video, but they lost out. Some years later, when WCW was trying to come out with their own line of action figures, Galoob jumped in on that chance. And of course, when Galoob went out of business, you know, only a few years again, or just a few years later, David Galoob and company rebranded, became Original San Francisco, basically recreated the exact same figures in LJN form. So instead of having these 4-inch figures, they doubled the size. Almost. Instead of having 8-inch figures like the LJNs, they were slimmed down a little bit to 7-inch figures. But a lot of the poses, same thing, very similar to what they had in LJN, very similar to what they came out in series 1 and 2 of their own Galoob line in 1991. So uh, Tom Zank is the 12th and final. I don't want to say 12th and final figure, the 12th and final character, because with all the variants and paints changes and all that, there's obviously a lot more than 12 figures in Series 1, but 12 characters released in Series 1. So 1990 WCW Galoob Series 1 is in the books. Next week, we will conclude the Tuesday shows with Series 2. If I don't have the painted Series 3 unreleased figures on hand. Now, technically, when I post video for Series 2, post video, that still gives me 7 days to get those figures in, right? Now, come the following Tuesday, if I have those figures on hand and I'm able to make a video, we'll still have another week then. But otherwise, for right now, guys, be prepared that next week could potentially be the final Tuesday show. If anybody does want me to do Original San Francisco, that's really the only line that I feel like I'm the most complete at and I have interest in making. If you guys would like to see any other toy line, it does, like I said, it doesn't have to be wrestling related. Bone Breaking Action mentioned he wanted to see Nakatuni Terrors. I can go back and do a Tuesday show for, series 1 through 13 of Nakatuni Terrors if that's what you guys want. That's perfectly fine. So there are plenty of things that we can take a look at. Just let me know what you're interested in, and even the Jack specific wrestling superstars. Do I have every figure? Not even close. There's like 500 or 600 pieces. I probably have like 150 of them between the singles, 2-packs, and 3-packs. So as far as loose figures, I don't know, like 10, 15. So they're basically all carded. So those videos won't take long to make because we're only looking at them in package, right? But we can backtrack. We can basically go through any of the reviews, Mattel monsters or mutants, anything like that. So there's so many different lines to go through. We could look at the Mattel retros again if you guys like. Your call. Leave in the comments what you would like to see. What I could do at the end of next week is put up another YouTube community post and ask the question, give you some options, see what the viewers want, and you guys just vote on that, and I can keep the Tuesday shows rolling from there. But I'd have to get like something substantial, like 50 votes or more. If I get like 10 votes, then it tells me that there's really no interest in continuing on, which is fine. I mean, we've been doing this for, again, by the time next week rolls around, almost eight months. That is a lot of time to devote to one segment of the channel, guys. This has been so much fun, and with you guys and the interaction, the communication, the comments, it's been amazing. So, as always, thank you so much for tuning in. I will talk to you guys in the comments as always, and see you guys in the next video. All right, take care, everybody.